Good evening, everyone. I'm Cindy Elder. I am the executive director of the Barrington Land Conservation Trust. And I'm super happy to welcome you to, I can't believe it, the sixth event in our 2023 learning series. We didn't really mean to have so many events, but amazing people kept coming up on our radar, like our guest tonight, and we just couldn't say no. I also want to say hello to TV World out there, to all the folks who are on Zoom tonight. We have 20 or 30 people out there participating virtually, and we welcome them as well. This is a special evening for us. It's also, I think we have to acknowledge this is a fairly difficult week. And as I think about the land acknowledgement that I usually do at the start of any event, one of the things I've been thinking about is that, we live here in a place that has been populated by indigenous peoples for time immemorial, and in particular, the ancestral home of the Pokanoket peoples. And they were known as wonderful stewards of the land. And one of the trails that we have here in Barrington Solms Woods was, in particular, it was known as a place of peace. And it was a sacred place, a place of childbirth. And I want to keep those hopeful, positive thoughts in mind tonight as we think about these natural places that we preserve, and as we think of the turmoil in the world and people who are suffering right now and some very sad things going on, but to also put that in context with the really beautiful and wonderful things that are happening as we preserve natural spaces. So that's kind of a prolonged land acknowledgement, but it seemed like tonight we needed to do that. So the Barrington Land Conservation Trust is in the forever business. It's our job to care for, to protect the 300 acres of land that are under our management in perpetuity. We also educate the public about these resources, and we rely on volunteers and charitable support to do our work year after year. And I would like to thank all of the volunteers and contributors in the audience. There are many. And if you haven't had a chance to support the Land Trust, we have donation envelopes, QR codes, information about our work at the registration table, and we hope you'll consider supporting our work. I'm also really grateful to the Barrington Public Library, our partner in this, and our presenting sponsor, Chart House Realtors, and also all of the great sponsors who have made it possible for us to offer this program at no charge to the public. In fact, all of our programs are offered at no charge to the public, and that includes our walks as well as our educational programs. So tonight we welcome John Kostrzewa. Did I say that right?
Absolutely correct.
Okay, I was doing the pronouncer at on the Google machine at home. John Kostrzewa, who I've known for a long time and still have trouble pronouncing his name. He's someone who knows the wild side of Rhode Island almost better than anyone I've ever met. After 4 decades in the newspaper industry, including roles as a business reporter, columnist, business editor, and assistant managing editor of the Providence Journal, he retired. And like many retired people, he went right back to work as an adjunct professor at Bryant University. And then he decided to take a walk, and then another, and another. You may have read about his walks in his popular series in the Providence Journal, Walking Rhode Island. And now he's compiled some of his favorite walks into a new book, Walking Rhode Island, 40 Hikes for Nature and History Lovers with GPS coordinates, photos, and trail maps. I know I'm as excited as you are to hear John's stories and to share his book with friends and family. Please join me in welcoming John Kostrzewa.
I get it on? Can you swap that? There we go. Perfect. That's good. Thank you, Cindy, and thank all of you for being here. What a wonderful group we have here. It's been a pleasure on the way and to meet so many new friends, so many old colleagues from the Providence Journal, friends, scouters I worked with for a number of years. It's absolutely a joy to be here tonight and talk a little bit about walking Rhode Island. First of all, can everybody hear me okay? Sounds great, good. So we've got a group, and I talked to a few of you outside. We have hikers here, we have some walkers, we have some people who are thinking about becoming walkers or hikers, and then we have some people who just love to hear about and read about Rhode Island, its history, its wildlife, its geological formations. So I've structured a talk today to talk to you a little bit about my background and how hiking has become so important to me in my retirement. And then how that interest in hiking translated into a column in the Providence Journal called Walking Rhode Island, and how that evolved into a new book called Walking Rhode Island, 40 Hikes for History and Nature Lovers. I'd like to take you on some fall hikes. It's a perfect time of year to get into the woods. And I'll take you on some short nature hikes, some urban hikes, some family hikes, along the shore, some coastal hikes, and then some challenging hikes. And I'd like to share with you a little about what I've observed on the trails, a little bit about the history, a little bit about the geology, the vegetation, and the wildlife. At the end, I'll talk to you a little bit about what's inside the book. And as we go along, I'll try to mention some of the challenges that I see as I've been hiking through Rhode Island. And of course, I'll leave some time at the end for questions. And I do appreciate the questions that were submitted that Cindy sent to me. There was Tony and Rich and Mary and Beverly, I think. If I don't get to your questions during the presentation, please make sure you ask at the end. How does that sound? All right, good. As I've walked across Rhode Island for the last few years, one thing has become crystal clear, and that's for such a small state, just 1,200 square miles, there is an amazing amount of opportunities to hike different trails, see different history, different wildlife, different terrain, all in such a small state. You can get to all these places very, very easily. Let me give you some examples that are in the book. Who knows where this is? Beavertail, Gold Star right here. For many, many years, we would drive out on the entrance road, park at that iconic lighthouse, walk out on the rocks, read the morning newspaper, watch the boats, a great Sunday afternoon. Then I learned a few years ago, there's actually a 4-mile trail that goes all the way around the perimeter of the peninsula. I'll take you on a couple stops. As you walk from the iconic lighthouse there, along this green bank, you come to a huge man-made mound of dirt. And you do the history, and that was once part of what was called Whiting Battery. There were 2 gun turrets right next to it. During World War II, the Rhode Island National Guard manned that station with the guns to protect the coast from enemy invasion. Beavertail was one of the pickets in the line of defense the military set up all along the ocean, all along the East Coast. As you walk directly down from the greenery there, from Whiting Battery, you come to these huge rectangular blocks on the shore. And when the sun hits those with the salt spray, beautiful, they glisten, unbelievable. On the far side, there's some carving there with floral patterns. Those are called Peyton's blocks. And they're called that because in the middle 1800s, a schooner called the SS Peyton was carrying those blocks from Boston to Virginia. They had been carved in Boston. They were going to be on the cornice of a big government building in Alexandria. The schooner got caught in a storm, wrecked, the blocks went to the bottom of the ocean, and they stayed there until 1938, when those powerful wind and powerful waves threw those blocks up on the shore, where they've stayed ever since. They're actually a beautiful, unique site, and they're right there if you just look down the bank, down from the Whiting Battery. The trail continues along that rocky section. You go northwest along the East Channel, and you come to this. This is called Lionhead Gorge. And it's called that because when the waves come crashing in and hit those high rock walls, it roars like a lion. And you can sit on the banks there and feel and taste the salt spray, watch the seagulls. You look out over the East Channel and you see the sailboats going by. That's Breton Point, Newport on the far side. You could stay there forever, but there's still about 3 miles to go. So you go back up the bank, across the green area, across the entrance road you drove in on, and you go on the far side of the peninsula. You pick up what's called the Red Dot Trail. It's heavily vegetated, number of small trees, but as you're walking along, you realize you're walking on concrete. What the heck is that? And then a little while later, you're walking on hot top. What could this be? When you do the history, you realize that during World War II, that was a top secret military base called Spray Cliff. The Navy brought the best engineers around the country to work there. They brought the best brains from MIT there, and they worked on radar to intercept the Japanese fighters in the Pacific. It was done right there at Beaver Tail. It was a secret until just about 50, 70 years ago, quite a spot. You walk through Spray Cliff to the far side of the peninsula, and you go see the West Channel, and there's the trail which runs right along through these wildflower fields, above cliffs, hidden beaches, surf, an absolutely beautiful walk that I never knew existed until I got out on that side of the channel. You walk back to the iconic lighthouse and you're finished. We've been a lot of places in the Northeast, and I've seen a lot of places. I don't think there's a better place for unique natural beauty and military history than Beaver Tail, right here in Rhode Island. Right, you're 1 for 1. Here's number 2. Who knows what this is? Long Pond, gold star right here. This is in Hopkinton. You walk up this outcropping to the top and you see the shape, right? One big, long glacial pond, all right? If you're a movie fan, you may remember the movie Moonrise Kingdom. Sam and Susie run away from home. The first night they camp right here on the rocks. You can see that right in the movie. The story is that Wes Anderson, the famous director, searched all over New England for a perfect glacial, pristine pond to shoot that scene. And he picked Long Pond in Hopkinton. I took this picture right for Wes Anderson, set up his camera to make the scene, make the shot. Now to get there, you start on the far side of the pond, right? The east side, and you will go along this ledgy trail, about a mile, mile and a quarter. The lake is down here on your right. When you get to the east side of the lake, you'll cross a stream. And once you cross the stream, you look up, you will see this. This is called the Cathedral. And it's called the Cathedral because of those wonderful vertical high rock walls. You walk right up between them on those rocks that people call the pews, in between them to the top. If you hike there in the summertime, those trees fill in at the top. So as you walk along, it is shaded, it is quiet, and it is spiritual, I think. It is quite a place in Rhode Island, quite unique. You get to the top and you wander over to the outcropping I showed you before. Again, another unique place in Rhode Island called the one more. How about this one? Three Corners is close. Roger, very good. Tri-state marker. This is the only place where Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island touch. And the history is that back in the middle 1800s, there was a huge land fight between the landowners. Who owned what? Who gets to farm what? They hired lawyers. They went out and did surveying, couldn't figure it out. They finally formed a commission from Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, and the panel decided, okay, this is it. Here's the land. They sunk an obelisk 5 feet down, 5 feet up, and they marked it. Rhode Islanders, you stay on this side. Connecticut people, you stay over here. Massachusetts on the other side. And they marked it 1883. To get there, you start in the Buck Hill management area, and you walk along this impoundment, man-made, to create this beautiful water-filled waterfowl wildlife preserve. In the early morning, absolutely beautiful, noisy, loud, and you're walking straight up north from there. You walk right to the border at the top. You can go to the east over to Wallam Lake. You can go north all the way through Massachusetts, all the way to New Hampshire, where you want to find the tri-state marker. So you head west, and as you're walking west, you literally have 1 foot in Rhode Island, 1 foot in Massachusetts until you get to the marker. Now, I found all these places later in my life. Hiking is really not part of my tradition. I'll just have a couple minutes of what my background is. So my background, as Cindy mentioned, is in the newspaper business. I worked for 42 years for newspapers with stops in Worcester, Massachusetts, Lawrence, Massachusetts, Akron, Ohio, Columbus, Ohio. And then we came to Rhode Island in 1988 to work for the Providence Journal. And over the years, I worked as a reporter, as a deputy business editor, business columnist for a while, and then as an assistant managing editor, helping to run the newsroom. And Lynn and Tim, two of my old colleagues, you'll remember some of these folks. There's the old gang at the Journal. Good group of people. I stayed at the Journal until May of 2017 when I retired. I took a buyout. I loved the people. I loved the work, but I was exhausted from all the changes at the paper and I had had enough. So I stepped back. When I left the Journal in 2017, I really didn't know if I would ever work again. I had some simple goals. First of all, I wanted to get healthier. I wanted to reconnect with family and friends that I neglected over the long hours at the Providence Journal. And I wanted to sort of figure out what comes next. What's the next contribution I could make? So one of the first things I did is fell in with some of the old adult scouters I knew from scouting years ago when our three boys were in the program. And we started to hike. We started to hike twice a week, all around the state, places I'd never seen. This is Yagoo Pond in Rockville. And for many, many years during the summers, I would be on the far side there where the three Boy Scout camps are. And the far side of the pond was noisy. It was loud. It was boisterous. But on the other side of the pond, it was calm and it was placid. And I thought, you know, if you just get off the beaten track, there's probably 1,000 places like that in Rhode Island if you just go out and find them. We spent a lot of time hiking in Arcadia that a friend of mine mentioned that he was very familiar with Arcadia. This is the Mount Tom Trail, which runs through Arcadia parallel to 165. This is across the Wood River, one of my favorite spots. There's a bridge there called the AMC Bridge. You can stand in the middle of that bridge. In certain season, upstream, you can see fly fishermen casting for trout. You turn around, there are people putting in kayaks, putting in canoes. In times of year like this, in the fall, it is absolutely beautiful. So beautiful that when I went through all the pictures I had, this is what we chose for the cover of the book. Middle of the summer, we decided to hike the North-South Trail, and Al, who's here, who's a very organizer of the North-South Trail, was explaining to me. So the North-South Trail goes 78 miles from Blue Shutter Beach down here in Charleston, all the way along the Connecticut border, all the way to the northwest corner. Now, I had spent most of my life here in Providence, and we live in Cranston. And when I started to hike the North-South Trail, it's like I had never seen a part of the state like this before. It felt different. The history was different. The terrain was different. The yard signs were different out there. It just felt different. I decided to start doing research, a little bit about the history of where I was walking, and I started to post those on Facebook and social media. And I was surprised with the reaction I got. People I hadn't seen from years, from Ohio, from Massachusetts, cousins in California. And I decided, I'm going to do the research from each hike I take and start to post on social media. I sort of enjoyed it. It was part of the goal of what I had set. As you hike the North-South Trail, this is the Carolina management area down south. If you like wildflowers, huge, huge fields of wildflower you walk through. The blue marks mark the trail for you. This is along the Moosup River as the trail turns west through Coventry. Great place to rest and stop. When I did the history here, I learned that back in the 1960s, people from the city used to drive out to a nearby farm and then hike in with their kids for a half a mile to go right to this spot called Spencer Rock. And they liked it because the kids loved to slide down the water to those pools, like an amusement park. Just a wonderful spot out in Coventry. As the summer went on, we got a little bit stronger. We decided to go to New Hampshire to hike some of the 4,000 footers. This is the Falling Waters Trail, for obvious reasons. The trail actually goes right up along the edge of Falling Waters, all the way up to Little Haystack Mountain. And when you get to Little Haystack, you go on the Franconia Ridge Trail. That's Little Haystack in the background. 1.8 miles along this path. Literally, your head is in the clouds. You're above the cloud. You can reach out and touch the presidential range. It is quite a walk. When you get to Mount Lafayette, you come down the other side of the horseshoe, down the old Bridle Path Trail. Got to the end of the summer. The guys are hiking it. We're feeling it. We need a road trip. We decided to go to upstate Maine, Baxter State Forest, all right? It looks nothing like Rhode Island. It is wild up there. Stayed in the Roaring Brook camp, and we hiked along what's called the Knife Edge. That's the trail that runs right along the top of the mountain. Pretty unforgiving, 3 feet on either side. The most challenging hike I think maybe I've ever done, exhausting, but what an experience. What an experience. At the end of the the knife edge, you come to the highest point in Maine, Mount Katahdin, and you rest there. And when you stop at Katahdin, you realize this is the end of the Appalachian Trail, right? 2,200 miles, which runs all the way from Springer Mountain in Georgia, all the way to the spot right here. And when you stop and rest there, and you have some water, you see the through hikers, the people who have been hiking since the spring, coming all the way up the coast, hiking all summer to reach this point. And when you see them, they are filthy, okay? They are exhausted, but they get to this point and they celebrate. This is a life-changing moment. They've done something that very, very few of us will ever do. And it's quite an experience to stand there and watch them celebrate. When we finished up at Barrington State Forest, we were driving back to Rhode Island, and it was the end of the summer. I said, well, that was a fun summer. That was a good time. But what now? What happens after Labor Day? And I realized that it was the first time since I was a teenager that I didn't have a job to go to. A little bit of a thought, right? What do I do now? Can I hike forever? Maybe not. What happens next? Well, 2 or 3 weeks later, I'm actually hiking in Rhode Island. My cell phone lights up. I look at it. There's a former colleague at the Providence Journal. I hadn't seen her in 15 years. What the heck does she want? Got off the trail, called her back. She said, I'm teaching a course at Bryant University called Writing Workshop. We've got a last minute vacancy. We lost a professor to the West Coast. Can you come up and fill in for a semester? And my first thought was, that sounds like a lot of work. I'm not sure I want to do anything like that. We said, no, come on up, meet the professors. They offered a free lunch, which was key. I went up to the campus, met the professors. I said, okay, I will try this for 1 semester as a bridge from now to something else. 3 weeks later, after scrambling to do a syllabus, I walked into a classroom of 20 first-year students. And I have to tell you, I absolutely loved it. I loved the kids. I loved the campus. I loved the professors I met. I loved the academic environment. I liked it so much that I stayed for 3 years, 6 semesters. It was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. That took me to the summer of 2020. And if you remember back, that was the COVID summer. We have 3 boys, and they said, Dad, you're not going back to campus in the fall, right? You're not a young man anymore, a little bit dangerous, don't do that. So again, I'm not going back to Bryant. What do I do now? What's next? Where's my contribution? If you remember that fall of 2020, scary time, right? Businesses were closing, people being thrown out of work. Nobody knew what the future was going to be. I looked at the Providence Journal. I said, you know what? I know a little bit about business from my background. What if I offered some freelance stories to the paper about the economy? What's the impact of COVID? What comes next? They said, sure. So I wrote some freelance stories, about 15 of them in the fall of 2020. I sort of liked it. I liked doing the research. I liked talking to people again. People wrote me and said, John, it's good to see your name back in the paper again. That was good. That took me to January of 2021. These are the dark days, right? Middle of the winter. We live in Cranston. Carol and I looked out the window one day. There's all these people walking around. Where does all these people come from? If you remember, we were all locked at home. We were working from home. Our kids were working from home. Our governor told us to take it outside. So people were getting outside. When I went in the woods, who are all these people? 3 times as many people as normally went into the woods, according to the land trust, were now hiking in the woods. And when I looked at them, bad gear, no idea what they were doing. The questions they asked, I could tell they'd never been in the woods before. And I thought, you know, when I started hiking, I probably looked like that. I probably had the same question that they had. Would there be any value in my sharing what I knew with all these new hikers who were going in the woods? I approached the editors at the Providence Journal. They had turned over a bunch of editors, really new people I'm talking with, really didn't know my background. Well, what are you going to do, John? I said, it's very, very simple, okay? What I want to do is this. I want to take people where they haven't been before, sort of a basic idea of journalism, right? Take them where they haven't been before. And if they've been there before, if you're an experienced hiker, let me show you something different that you don't know about the geology or the wildlife or the history. Help them figure out the basics, what to take on a hike. And the 4th one became the most important one, because in the winter of 2021, there were many, many people that were never going to go hiking in the woods, okay? Never go for a walk. They were locked at home, the dark days. Why not show them something that's good about Rhode Island, okay? To get you through the winter. Just give you something to read. And that became an important part of what I did. So I started a column called Walking Rhode Island. They gave me a great display in the Rhode Island section of the paper. This is the Grills Preserve down in West Emily and Hopkinton. And I started to write. The editor said when I started, well, why don't you do this for a few months? Let's get to the summer and see where we are. Well, people seemed to like it. They wrote letters. I wrote a few more. I wrote a few more. So now 2.5 years later, I'm still doing the column. And I've now written about 120 columns in a variety of different places around the state. I was telling somebody outside before that about 2 years ago, people started writing me, John, I'm tired of clipping the Sunday paper, okay? Papers are all over the house. I go on vacation, I come back, I can't find the columns. I can't get through the website. I don't know how to reach the columns. Why don't you compile these into a book? And my first thought was, I did that for 20 years, okay? I'm not sure I want to edit a book at this point. So I put it aside. Then about a year ago, I was meeting with a good friend on the East Side, and we were talking about, what comes next and whatever. And he said, well, what are you trying to do? And it became clear to me that what was the best way I could do a couple things. What was the best way I could encourage people to get outdoors to exercise, to explore their state and learn some of the history? And second of all, when you get a little older, you start to think about what can I leave behind that's concrete, that the next generation could take a look at to get into the woods. What could that be? What could I put on the shelves of every library in the state? And so why not compile some of the hikes into the books? I met with Steve and Don Porter at Stillwater Books. I'd never done this before. They walked me through the process. And we started this 10, 11-month process of putting the hikes together. I re-hiked all the hikes again. And we came up with Walking Rhode Island, 40 hikes for nature and history lovers with pictures, GPS coordinates, and trail maps. So the goal for all the columns, as well as the book, is to be geographically diverse. Have places all around the state so anybody in Rhode Island could find one nearby and go hiking, get outdoors and to walk. And second of all, do a variety of hikes. Easy hikes, nature hikes, urban hikes, coastal hikes, challenging hikes. A hike from everybody if you want to get outside. So let me share a few of the fall hikes that I think that would be perfect at this time of year. This one's right in your backyard, Soam Woods. You heard Cindy talk about it at the beginning. This is right off of Washington Road. The name Soames come from the old Pokanocket Road for the southern section of their ancestral lands, which covered really the entire East Bay Hidden section. There's a beautiful ridge trail, low ridge, which runs right along Echo Lake. And as you walk along, there's the openings in the trees. And at various seasons, you'll see geese there, you'll see osprey diving for fish. And the color is just starting to change. An absolutely beautiful place to walk. Family hike, easy. Wide, flat paths, no trouble for walkers. Well marked, see the blazes on the trees there. And again, you see these vernal pools. Now, vernal pools, these soil depressions in the land, in the summer times, they absolutely dry up, all right? You won't even notice the water there. In the fall, off the hillside, they will catch the water. In the winter, they will freeze. And if you ever hike there in the winter, they are beautiful circles of glass, absolutely beautiful. In the spring, they melt. And that's the key, because in the spring, they become the breeding ground for all the salamanders, the fairy shrimp, the tree frogs that have all burrowed into the dirt there. The spring comes, they breed in the vernal pools, and new life starts. There's a couple of those you see in Soam Woods. They're absolutely, absolutely beautiful. This is Tillinghast Pond in West Greenwich. You start on the far end. If you go all the way around the pond, you'll pass an old historic cemetery. You will pass a foundation of an old farmhouse. You'll be on a ridge line on the far side. Always the pond is in with view. A beautiful, placid Rhode Island pond, which is actually a beautiful fall hike when all those trees turn color. One of the readers asked questions about urban hikes. There's 5 urban hikes in the book. This is Newtoconconnet Hill in Providence. So folks, for 29 years, I worked right down here, right downtown Providence. I never knew this existed. I wish I had. There's great history here. When Roger Williams carved out Providence, the northwest side of the city, this is the treaty he signed with the Narragansetts to carve out the city. You see the treaty at the Historical Society. You can actually see his signature. Good piece of history. You get there by walking up a stone path, very, very short. It's about a quarter mile. The path was built by the Works Progress Administration in the 30s, the Roosevelt program to put people to work. There's a bandstand, there's the foundation of on the side. In the 30s, nobody had any money. On a Sunday afternoon, they got 10,000 people there on Newtoconconnet to listen to the band concert. Beautiful summit. I've seen people painting the city from there. You go along the top, there are ridge trails, a beautiful urban hike that I think Beverly asked me about. You can't do a Rhode Island book without ocean hikes, right? This is Scituate in Middletown. The trail actually goes right along the green area, right along this Crescent Beach, all the way to the point. And you can stand on the point. The waves will crash on all three sides of you. Absolutely a beautiful place. If you like birds, that green area in the middle attracts the flyover bird. That's called the Atlantic Flyway. All the migratory birds coming from Florida, going south, that's heavily vegetated, it's safe, they will stop there. They've counted 300 different species of migratory birds that have landed there. When you come to the edge of the trail, they have a bulletin board where the kids scroll the birds that they've seen. There's always 12, 15 birds that I've never heard of on the board. It's a beautiful place for birders. And finally, challenging hikes. This is the Patchogue Trail, which starts out even easily enough at Beach Pond off 165. You go along the banks of the pond, dead north, and then west, actually into Connecticut, into the Patchogue Forest. It is rocky, it is cliffy, there are clefts, there are mosses, there are all kinds of things there that you work your way up to it, right? Don't start out with the Patchogue Trail, work your way up. That is what I consider a challenging hike. Now, when I did the book, I decided by design to make the first chapter in the book the Ken Weber Conservation Area in Smithfield. And the reason why I named it that is that when we got to Rhode Island in 1988, Ken Weber was working on the copy desk and he did special sections at the paper. He was also writing the column on Saturday that many of you remember. And because I was on the business staff, I was assigned to write some stories for him for the special sections. And we got along pretty well. He had grown up in Toledo. I'd lived in Ohio for a while. He liked the Cleveland Indians. I liked baseball. We got along. And at one point, I said, you know, we're new to the state, Ken, where should we go? And he gave me a copy of his book, Walks and Rambles in Rhode Island, which became, as many of you know, the Bible of hiking in the state for 30 years. I still have one. And when I plan my hikes, I'll go through it just to check and see where Ken saw and whatever. Just a wonderful, wonderful volume. So, can I borrow your book 1 minute? I just read you one thing. So Ken has taught me a lot, and I chose to, this is the only reading I'll do, I promise. So here's how I started. Ken Weber, the late outdoorsman, environmentalist, and nature columnist of the Providence Journal, cut the trail here that's named in his honor. The short, simple path along Cascade Brook fits Weber's view that hiking should not be a race through the woods, but a chance to pause along the way, explore, and think. He wrote, I don't consider walking a competitive sport or endurance event. Those who plunge ahead, never stopping, looking neither left nor right, miss far too much. There is so much beauty, history, and wildlife along these routes that it would be a shame not to see as much as possible. And that takes a little slowing down. Wow. To me, a guy from the newspaper industry was always racing towards the next story, racing to deadline. Wasn't that a wise thing? What do we see if we just slow down and look to the left and look to the right? What do we see? Thank you. So with Weber's words in mind, let me tell you a little bit about what I observed when I walk down the trails and look to the left and look to the right. Now, I want to be clear. I am not a historian. I am not an archaeologist. I am not a birder. I am not a naturalist. I am trained in none of those things. The only thing I'm trained is to observe, to look and to watch, and then do research about what I see. And when I don't understand, even after the research, find the experts who'll tell me what I'm looking at. That's all I did for a living. And that's all I've done in the book with all these things I've seen. So what have I seen in the woods? Wildlife. What's this? Fish hawk. That is an osprey, right? Beautiful giant bird. This is at the Great Swamp in South Kingstown. They nest on top of these high telephone poles. If you look a little closely, there's a big head, the adult, and there's a small guy. That's the baby, right? And if you stop along the dike, along the swamp, and you wait, you'll see the big guy, the adult, leave the nest, spread his wings, and soar up into the heavens, almost out of sight. And they swoop, and they soar, and you realize they are hunting. And when they spot something that they're hunting, a fish in the water, they will dive straight down like an arrow, fast, straight down. Just before they hit the water, they turn their whole bodies around, spread out their talons, and dive into the water and grab the fish. It is explosions of water and sweeping feathers, and it is violent. And then you realize that he takes the fish, flies back up to the nest, and feeds the baby. That is the natural world. It is quite a sight. Now, the challenges somebody asked me about in the question you asked. When I did the research, in the 1970s, they did a census of all the Northeast. There were only 2 osprey nests left in Rhode Island. 2. Now, why was that? We were using pesticides, right? We were using DDT for everything on our gardens, okay? We were destroying habitat. We were destroying the osprey to the point where they were not flying up in South America every spring to breed, fly back every year. They weren't coming up anymore. Smart people figure things out, okay? So back in the late 60s, early 70s, people said, you know what? Rachel Carson and others, DDT is not a good thing. It's a bad thing. And they banned it. They started to protect more natural habitat, like these great state areas, like the Great Swamp in Rhode Island, as nesting areas. They put the osprey on the endangered species list. And you know what? Smart people figure things out. You go any place in Rhode Island now, Napatri, the Narrow River, Connaught Farms, right over here at Osamoquin, right along 114. You will see osprey nests everywhere. They have returned. We have saved them. Osamoquin, by the way, if you haven't been there, it's right off 114. It's a nice, easy, color-coded walk. You walk along the Barrington River, and you see this guy up in the nest, and you can watch him feed and hunt. Beautiful area. Osamoquin, by the way, Cindy mentioned, he was the great sachem of the Pokanoket, when the Pokanoket lived in this entire area, and the preserve his name for Osamoquin, the chieftain. While we're at wildlife and Osamoquin, as you walk along this trail along the Barrington River, you come to a bridge that goes into like a island area, and these all these mud flats, all right? So you're walking along the mud flats, and you see these nickel-sized holes, all right, in the mud. There's like dozens of them, and you say, okay, excuse me, these are trekking poles, right? People walk along, they're poking holes in the sand. They are not trekking poles. If you stop, wait, quietly, no shadows, you will see fiddler crabs, okay? They come darting out of the holes. They've been down below, you know, laying their eggs, looking for food. When it's quiet, they come darting up. You can watch them. As soon as you move a little bit, they will dart back into the hole, and then they'll come back up. They're quite a sight. If you have kids or grandkids, watch the fiddler crabs. They're absolutely enjoyable. All right, vegetation. These are the red pines along Peck Pond, up at the Pulaski Natural Area up in the northwest corner of the state. These were actually planted by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s, that Roosevelt program that put kids to work in the woods. Absolutely a beautiful stand of red pines. Eastern white pines in the Charleston area, the Carter Preserve. I love this walk. It's soft on the feet. You can see forever in the winter. Well marked, a beautiful fall winter walk at Carter. Okay, Arcadia, which I mentioned before, for the Mount Tom Trail. I wanted to stop here for a minute. First year I was at Yagu with Frank and Roger. One of the people, older guys who was there, told me the story, which I've always remembered. In 1951, there was a huge wildfire that blew in from Connecticut. It was wild. It was pushed by the winds, you know, blowing towards Rhode Island. Wild. It was burning fast. All the guys from Yagu went out to create these fire breaks, okay, to stop the fire from coming into this great preserve. The fire was too hot, too big. It jumps the fire breaks, goes right around Yagu Pond. The guys said that when the fire hit those pine trees, they went up like Roman candles, explode in the air. The fire burned for 3 days. It burned all the way into Arcadia until it burned out. When the fire stopped, when it got cool, the guys walked out in the woods and they told me 2 things. There was about 6 inches of ash on the ground, okay? Everything had burned. And the other thing, it was absolutely quiet. No birds, no grandmammals. The most discouraging time for these guys who had built this camp and loved the woods, it is now gone. But as I said, smart people figure things out. They rallied. They got the support of the federal government, the state government. They got all the nonprofit groups in Rhode Island, including a lot of the scout troops. And they staked out parts of this forest that had burned down. They gave them the seedlings and say, go plant. And they planted and they planted and they planted until they were exhausted. And I love this part. When they're finished, they're standing there. And what have we done? And it started to rain. Gave rain and moisture to the seedlings and they grew. When you go to Arcadia today, it is the lushest, densest, deepest, most beautiful forest in Rhode Island, I think. Smart people figure things out, and they did. And I love that story. So while we're talking about, this is the salt marsh, okay? This is in the Warren Preserve, Hale Preserve. That's the downtown Warren. Beautiful salte. When I hiked here with Rock Singwell, I explained the history that the old farmers, they learned they could feed the livestock by cutting the hay, feeding it for cheap fodder, made a living out of doing that. And you'll see this salte, by the way, everywhere, right? All the marshes along the rivers down this way, along the seacoast. But as my good friend Alex Kuffner, who is, I think, the best environmental reporter in the Northeast, writes for the Journal, explains, we are starting to lose the salt marsh, right? Because of rising tides. And what do you see? If you go to the Two-Site Marsh in Warren, the Kickamet River is at the back. When the tide comes in from the ocean on the Brackish River, it'll feed this tidal creek. And look at the shore. That's all degraded salt marsh. So what have we lost? We've lost nurseries for young fish. We've lost the salt sparrow. We've lost nesting ground. That's starting to happen all over Rhode Island. Smart people figure things out. We got to figure that out, folks, okay? Rising seas are destroying the habitat. All those pictures you saw, we are going to lose that unless we figure that out. Geology. How am I doing for time? All right. I think we all know the story about the geology, right? So back in the early 1800s, the accepted science was all the rocky canyons we see out west, the rocky ridges, the riverbeds, they were all caused by cataclysmic events when layers of the Earth's crust banged into each other and then pulled apart, right? They're all geologic, all right? All the lands smacking each other. Well, about 1830 or so, people said, well, I think that's sort of right, but it might not be the whole story. John Muir, who founded the Sierra Society, goes to Alaska, and he sees these huge glaciers, right? Miles high, crossing across Alaska, pushing everything in front of it. And that becomes part of the science that, you know what? All these formations we see were formed partly by the glaciers. So the science now says that 10,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, sheets of ice, miles thick, came down from Canada like huge bulldozers, and they pushed all the loose stuff in front of it, like a bulldozer, pushing it down, pushing out, carving out the rivers, the valleys, the ridges. And one of the first ones that came down pushed it all the way across New England, all the way across Rhode Island, all the way out to sea. And then the weather changed. It got a little bit warmer. The bulldozer stopped. It dropped all that stuff right there in the ocean. So from Block Island all the way to Long Island, in the ocean, there was a ridge line. It's called the moraine, all the way through. After that one came through, another bulldozer came, but it didn't get as far as the ocean. It got as far as South County. And it created, when it stopped and the weather warmed, another ridge line called the recessional moraine. And now you can hike through westerly, which is where this is in the Champlain Glacier Preserve, westerly, Charlestown, South Kingstown, Narragansett, right along the top of that ridge line that was created by the glaciers 10,000 years ago. It is just wonderful walks through all those preserves. These are called kettle ponds. So when the glaciers are receding, they're perfectly round and they're absolutely beautiful. This one's in the Champlain Moraine, but Black Farm has a beautiful one in Hopkinton. When a huge chunk of ice would fall off the glacier and fall into the dirt, it was just like an ice cube at the beach and you dropped it, it started to melt and create a crevice there, perfectly round. Those are called kettle ponds. That's where the pieces of the glacier fell. No inlet, no outlet. It's all fed by groundwater. And you see these all over the state, especially in the southern part of the state. And then, of course, we've all seen these, right? The giant boulders, the erratics. So when the bulldozer is pushing all the dirt down from the north, have you ever seen a snow plow? It sort of circles on top of the plow, right? Well, as the glacier receded, it would drop everything on top of the plow wherever it dropped. So there are boulder fields, giant erratics all over the state. This is in Lincoln Woods, up in Lincoln. What's left? History. This is my favorite area. We all know the story of the stone walls, right? So when the farmers went into the fields to clean out all those glacial rocks, usually talk to the two oldest son, get the rocks out of the field, build a wall. And they did, but not all walls are the same. This is in Coventry. Look at it. This is Ramrod Strait, right? This is a boundary marker separating your farm from our farm, a boundary marker. And then you see corrals, pens for the animals, right? Usually the higher the wall, the bigger the animal. Goats, sheep, cows, horses, oxen. Bigger the wall, bigger the animal. I did this slide in Westerly last week, and people say, well, why did they leave all those trees in the middle of the corral? You know. So here's this. I just read this in the Providence Journal to reaffirm this. At the end of this 1780, I think it was, they did a census of all of Rhode Island. 2/3 of the state, 66% were cleared of all the trees. Can you believe that? 2/3 of Rhode Island was cleared for agriculture. That's all second growth forests that have come in the last 100, 150 years. That wasn't there when the farmers lived there. We're talking about walls. I learned just this summer, this is a Canochet farm in Marion. This is a decorative wall. See the cap on the top there, right here? That was put there to show off. This goes up a long driveway to the Sprague Mansion, the former governor, top of the hill. He lit that up, you could see it for miles. So when you visited, you drove up this driveway right along this decorative wall. Absolutely a beautiful drive all the way uphill to the mansion. Also in the woods, you will see these. These are sluiceways, mill races. Notice how the stones on the side. The idea was they learned that if you narrow the stream, the water would run quicker. You could turn a turbine. Almost every farm in Rhode Island had a sluiceway, which led to a small lumber mill and a vertical saw. Didn't take much to turn that saw up and down. Why did they need it? To cut the boards for their house, to cut the boards for their fences, for their barns. Everybody had to have a lumber mill. And again, if you had a farm in the woods and you had to cross the stream, you put these stone slabs down, which I think are engineering feat to create this bridge. Those have been there about 350 years, so the heaven wagons could cross right over the brook. I mentioned at the beginning in Buck Hill, the levee, the dike that had been built. This is up in Gloucester. And at one time, there was a Molly Brown brook that ran right from the top up here, right through here. So Alan Hawkins, who lived on the property, says, you know what? I've heard about these levees, and if you back up the water into a pond behind the levee, you create a waterfall, you can speed up the water, which can turn a turbine, turn a mill. So at the bottom of the hill, you can see the dike, he builds a factory where he cut lumber and made furniture. His son, Walter Hawkins, says, he was a self-taught mechanic, Walter Hawkins was. He says, you know what? What if I take a generator and put it where my father put the turbine wheel for the lumber mill? What'll happen if the water runs through that? He created electricity, early 1900s. He lit up his whole factory. Everybody said, what is this? He ran a line from there all the way into Connecticut and lit up part of Connecticut. He ran a line to the east, all the way to Clarkville in the George Washington Forest. He lit up that whole area. When I was walking on the top of that levee, there was a guy coming the other way on the levee, and he looks at me. You know, I'm not, he says, you're not from here, are you? And I says, nope. I says, I'm from Cranston. He says, you people from the city think you're so smart. The first electricity around, it was right here. And I think he was right. And they kept that there till Narragansett Electric bought it in the 1930s. Cellar holes all over the woods. A lot of them are overgrown. This is in Browning Woods in South Kingstown. They always usually have 6 steps down. Again, usually a rectangle or a square. The wood would have gone up on the side to a roof. In the back there, that would have been a chimney, okay, to heat the property. 3-sided meant a barn or someplace to put your animals or your equipment. There would have been a wooden door on that. The wood would have gone up with a roof. Here's interesting. The first time I hiked here, this is up in the Sprague Forest, I think up in the northwest. See the 6 pillars there? I was with a hiking buddy, said that's Rhode Island Stonehenge. I don't think so. What do you think that is? You look at it closely, okay? They're parallel. At one time, there would have been wooden beams going up and a roof. That was a granary. So when they took the crops, the corn or whatever out of the fields, they had to keep it dry until they brought it to market. You would pull the wagon right underneath there so it stayed dry. And you'll see those posts in a number of places in northern Rhode Island. Cemeteries. There are, by the Rhode Island Historical Cemetery Commission figures, 3,200 historic cemeteries in Rhode Island. 3,200. People have written, we have more per capita than almost any other place. Well, why is that? It's because of our nature. Every farm had their own cemetery, their own plot. Long before they created town cemeteries or church cemeteries, everybody had the same cemetery. And there's probably another 1,000 buried out there that we don't even see. This is at Black Farm. And I show this sign because, this slide, because that small stone, Charles Collins, he's 15 years old during the Civil War. He wants a fight. Joins the Union Army, goes down to the Mississippi River. He dies on the river. They bring his body back and they bury him in the family plot. And there's the father and the mother next door. A respectful place. Sometimes you scratch your head as far as what we're doing, but you'll see stuff like that with history like that all over the woods. This is Cuddy Hike in Exeter. I did this hike in the middle of the winter all by myself. Didn't see a soul. It was a beautiful, white, lovely hike. And I got to this section. I said, something's going on here. Okay, that looks like a foundation for a barn or something. What could that possibly be? Very, very quiet there. I found a history by a guy named Gary Bowden, who lived down in Exeter. He's passed away now. He did all the research here. And what he found was in the middle 1800s, when smallpox was ravaging Rhode Island, the elected leaders of Exeter decided to rent these farmhouses in places. And if you got sick, you were sent to the farmhouse to work until you get healthy, or you died. In the back of the stones there is a small path which runs to a hillock. And there's only one grave that's marked. It's for Sarah. I can't remember what her name was. And she came from, I can't remember where. But if you kick the snow and move the leaves around a little bit, you see all these tiny stones, all unmarked. A lot of them. I think those are all the smallpox victims. So I hiked here in the winter of 22, I think, right in the middle of the COVID scare. And it was like, this is history repeating itself. Same thing came through. We isolated people. There was a vaccine back then. And people, this is crazy. Why are you taking a vaccine? We all the same arguments. I was like, wow, this is interesting. Very, very quiet, respectful place. What you find if you stop and look, you could have walked right by this, but if you stop and look, you would be amazed. Now, we know a lot about who we were for the last 300, 400, 200 years, because when the English and the Europeans settled here, they wrote everything down, right? Birth records, death records, land records. Many of the farmers kept diaries, which are amazing when you read through them, to read the history of the area. But you have to understand and remember that long before the English got here, for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, the indigenous people lived in exactly the same place. They were right here in Solon, right here in Barrington. But we know so much less about the indigenous people because they didn't write a lot of things down, oral tradition that we've lost. What we know a lot of times is what the English told us about the indigenous people. But again, there's a tremendous history there that I think we all should know much more about if we could. What we do know is this is off Route 2 in South Kingston. This is the Great Swamp Monument. So you all know the history of the King Philip's War, 1675. Terrible, terrible fight between the indigenous people and the colonists over land rights. Didn't understand each other's language, cultural differences, didn't get along. Brutal, brutal war, filled with atrocities. I read a lot of war stories, absolute brutality. 1675, there's a stockade here. The Narragansetts are hanging out, women, children, guys, middle of the swamp. Those blocks are marked for Plymouth Colony, Massachusetts Colony, Connecticut Colony. They marched the militia into the swamp and they burned it down, massacred the Native American people there. Just one of the atrocities. There were atrocities with the indigenous people as well. I don't mean to discount that, but brutality, part of our history. This is a nice half-mile walk right off Route 2. Circular, quiet, solemn, respectful place. People put little stones or shells, things on the shelf there to remember people. Interesting place. And then I mentioned before, this is in Wickaboxet, the Wilcox family, when they wrote in their diary that the Narragansetts were always live in the summer along the sea to fish and to hunt and to farm. During the brutal Rhode Island in winters, they would all move inland and they would live in the caves on some of these farms. And we know that from the diaries of the Wilcox family. And then there are some of these mysteries. So we all know about cairns, right? If you ever hike, cairns usually mark the trail. They show you direction. They could be a property boundary. This is in the Park of Woodlands in Coventry. There's a bunch of these about 5 feet tall, right? There's no rhyme or reason as far as why there's one there, there's one there, there's one there, there's one there. They don't mark any trail. They'll never have farmed this area. It's so rocky and brutal. It doesn't mark farmland or river. And it's been a mystery, as far as I've read, as far as what those actually were. So some people say the indigenous people built those as ceremonial prayer stones. I was at a talk in Cranston. What do you mean you don't know? Look at this. And she showed me the reason. Yeah, it's great. I understand that. I understand the supposition. But why are they in patent? What was the ceremony? And I've never read what that history might be. Other people say when the Vikings came on shore and pillaged and looted, they put these up as markers for their conquests, right? Put them on the, yeah, maybe, maybe not. Other people say that at the end of the farm cycle, we started to build our towns and our churches. So in the off season, the farmers and their boys would go out, collect the stones, pile them up. In the winter, they would come with sleds and they would sell the rocks to the town center to build the foundations for the churches and the town halls. So the question is, why are they still there? Well, if you read the history of Rhode Island, very, very quickly when the Industrial Revolution came, people left the farms, went to the cities, and they may have left those behind, okay? Still a mystery to me, if anybody knows the answer to those. And you see them in different places. Blue Pond and Hopkinton, Escoheek Trail, and here I've seen them a few places. Here's another one. Somebody, obviously, right, put those stones under the 2 corners, right? That's not natural. So what the heck is that? They call those pedestal stones, right? Some people have said they were landmarks. They are so huge. This is in Tiverton, Bacasset Trail. If you're out in the woods, it's a landmark. You can see this from miles away, okay? Maybe. Some people say if you put an instrument under there like a drum and you banged it, it would amplify the sound. So it was a warning device to let other people know something was going on. Other people say you built a fire under there, the columns of smoke would come out both sides and give you a good signal beacon, indicate a location. And then I've heard the other story though. You know what? The Rhode Island winters were so brutal, okay? They came up so fast with no warning that if you were out in the fields a mile from the farmhouse and you needed a place to go in the storm, I don't know about you, but no matter how bad the weather is, I ain't crawling under there. Still a mystery. I don't know really what the answer to that as far as why those are there. What do I have left in a few minutes? A lot of that I try to capture in the book, 40 Hikes from Nature and History Love. I'll just like a couple things that what's in the book. Each of the 40 hikes has a trail map. I met a hiker named Jeff Walker out of Westerly who volunteered to go with me to re-hike the trails and did, for my money, the best 40 maps that exist out there. You know, if you have these with you, you can't go wrong. Each of the maps, where you park, directional areas, the way I walk, cemetery, the natural features like rattlesnake ledges, Phillips Pond, farmhouses over here, nice, easy to read trails with, again, a navigation bar here and a direction bar here, one for each of the hikes. Each of the hikes has basic information at the beginning. What's the distance I walked, how long it took me, the difficulty, easy but moderate over some ledges and rocky hillside. How do you get there? Can you park there? Can you bring your dog? And the last state hike, which is important because again, we know that the trails change, right? What looks like a trail in April will change during the summer, will change during the fall. So you have to pay attention to that. And also the GPS for those people who use GPS. Each of the hikes have 3 or 4 pictures, which I give as landmarks. Okay, so if you're hiking along the trail and you see the landmark, you know you've hiked a mile or a mile and a half. This is in Weedamo Woods in Tiverton. This is Borden Brook. This is one of my favorite scenes. If you see the 2 posts in the back there, see this here and here? They would put boards in here, stop the brook, create a pool of water back here, and run the water through a lumber mill right here. And this was a commercial mill. And they sold this board down to the Secundit River up and down the coast. Well, you had to get over the brook, right? So they built this very, very heavy 15-foot wide stone bridge. There is no cement, no mortar in that. It's all fitted stones. Amazing engineering, one of my favorite sites. Each of the walks has trail tips, headgear, what you need to wear to make sure you stay safe. Again, what you should take with you on a longer hike, when you need to wear orange when it's hunting season. What about trail etiquette? Somebody asked before about ticks. There are guidance in there as how to avoid ticks on the trail. We all know they're very, very terrible to be out there. You have to be very, very careful. There are trail tips at the end of the book. And then at the end, I have all the other 80 hikes I've taken that are not in the book with the date, where I hiked, and easy to moderate. Most libraries still have these on the shelves. You can look them up if you want. Sometimes you can go online to follow them. But again, there's another 80 hikes at the end of the book. So just to finish up, and I know several of you had questions that I probably didn't get to. So usually everybody asks me this question, no matter where I've been. And they always ask, John, is that all you do is hike? And my answer is no. This is what I like to do. This is Stepstone Falls in Exeter, one of my favorite places. There's nothing better than a soft chair, a cold drink, reading the morning paper, listening to that water from below the falls. That to me is, well, you know which paper I mean. Wonderful spot. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions that any of you have. Yes. Yes, I have.
And I'm just going, what I'm going to do, because the folks on Zoom can't hear your question. So I'm going to repeat the question for them. So have you been to Mount Hope Farm in Bristol?
Yes, in fact, I've been there 3 times. We were just there with 2 friends a couple of weeks ago. It's one of the trails in the book, as a matter of fact. It is a wonderful, easy family walk. You can go whatever loop you want to go, but one trail is on a paved road, which runs all the way down to Cove Cottage. And as you walk out there, you can actually walk down to a Church Cove, which is a beautiful body of water fed by the Narragansett Bay. The Mount Hope Bridge is there in the distance. You can see the cars going over. You can see the other side of the river, the little houses. There's a big rock in the middle there where I'm told, I haven't seen this, but the harbor seals will come during the winter and haul out. And when they eat the herring, I see some nodding of heads. Your question is a nice, easy trail. Yes, wonderful. Yeah. So here's the curiosity. So they're not CCC, they're WPA, okay, Works Progress Administration. So I did a lot of work on this. So Roosevelt creates the Work Progress Administration, right, for people in the city to build like Newton Cannon Hill, right? Public works projects. He gets another group of kids for the CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps, sends them up into the woods. That property was owned by the old Happenrepper family, okay, the old beer and the what's the big boatyard out there in Bristol? So my question is, why is the WPA working on this property? I don't know the answer to that, okay? I could guess, but I don't know. There are beautiful channels. She's referring to down off the hillside, which runs down to the bay. There are these stone channels that are really well built. And they go underneath the roadway and then drain to the cove. They're really beautiful structures, and they've lasted since the 1930s. And they put the seal right there, so they're not hiding it. But how we got the WPA to build those, I have not read or heard the answer to that question. Good question. Tim.
I've heard that you mentioned those cairns may have been built by Native Americans.
Yeah.
I've also heard that some of the stone walls were built by Native Americans, or maybe for ceremonial purposes.
Yeah.
And that's been, I guess, figured out by the angles and the kind of the direction of the stone walls. Do you know anything more about that?
A little bit. So there's a place called Connaught in Hopkinton, and the Historical Society there has done a lot of research on the trails there. So as you cross Connaught Brook, you walk up on a hillside, and you see all these foundations where the colonial farmers built their houses. You walk further up on the hillside, and there are all these stone walls. The Historical Society in Hopkinton says if you look at them closely, they're in the shape of serpents or turtles or animals, and they are convinced those are indigenous, that the Native Americans built those for some type of marking or ceremonial purpose. I take their word for it. I would love to see a carbon data go out there and like date when these things were built, or somebody who really knows what they're doing to verify that. But I believe the Historical Society in Hopkinton, I think those are probably indigenous in some way. And I've seen them. And they look like nothing I've seen the English or the Europeans built. Somebody else built those. I think those are indigenous. And I've also heard that walls occasionally they would build as well.
We have a question from our Zoom audience.
Yes.
Do you have any suggestions for walks that you can access via public transportation?
Public transportation. So in the urban walk section, there's a good hike at Roger Williams Park. I think the buses go to Roger Williams Park. There are actually 5 ponds there, okay? And there's a trail that runs in between them all the way around. It's really a nice walk. It's a nature walk, actually, because you're in the trees and the shrubbery all the way along. If you look up the hillside, you see all that great statuary and monuments that the zoo people have put up there. So you see sort of the urban side on one side and then the pond on the other. That's a good urban hike. The East Coast Greenway is a bike path. It's the old railroad bed, which you can take now from Providence through Cranston into Warwick, into West Warwick, all the way out through Coventry, all the way to Sterling, Connecticut. And my guess is you could access points of that with a bus. In the book, I do the trail, which is called the West Warwick Greenway, which runs right along the Patuxent River there. So one interesting fact, so you're walking along the West Warwick Greenway, right? And you're walking along the river, and you see the Royal Mills over there, and you see the train yards over here, they got a caboose. Then you walk up on a trestle, and the river is down below you. And as you're walking on the trestle, it smells sweet. What could this possibly be? That's soap. You go a little further, it's the Bradford Soap Works that you walk right behind. And if you look down, you see the dam, the Bradford Soap Works built in the old days to channel the water through the mill. And they still make soap there. Your Camay and your bath soaps are made right there in West Warwick. But as far as an unusual urban hike, it's beautiful. So anywhere along the Greenway, I think you could take a bus and see that. This gentleman had one.
Why were they here?
Well, that's the age-old question, right? And you'll get the argument on all sides of that. When I heard the Viking story, I said, yeah, that happened, right? I did a lot of research and people make reference to it. Lynn will tell you, okay, so what's the primary source here? Okay, where does that information come from? And I dug and I dug and I dug. I can't find it. Not written down anywhere. Where do you come to that conclusion? So I don't know. I don't know if there's any answer to that question or not. Over here? No? Anybody else? Yes.
How did you manage the north-south hike?
Yeah.
I mean, it's 75 miles or so, and
Yep.
did you call home and pick me up? Or
No. So 78 miles. We did it on 7 legs of 11 miles each. I was with a group of scouters. Frank Carnavale was our expert map and compass guy. And some of the people like John Caramadre and Jim Robinson in that group, we got the maps and we actually plotted out how far we wanted to walk each segment. We would drive to where we ended, leave a couple cars there, drive to the trailhead, walk the route, get into the cars, drive back to the beginning of the trail. Al was here before, and at one time there was a bus that used to take you to various parts of the trail. Trombley bus. I'm not sure they do that anymore or not. But yeah, you got to navigate it because it's a one-way. We call that out and back, right? It's not a loop.
Right.
You're going to go a certain distance, and then you got to find your way back. Unless you want to walk back, 11 miles, you have to find a way to get you back to the trailhead. And there are a lot of trails like that in Rhode Island that you got to plan. I tell everybody that I have so much fun on the trails when I spend a couple hours before I go doing the research about the trails. I'll look at Ken Weber's book. What did he find? What did his trail look like? I'll look at Ernie Germani's Trails and Walks on the internet, who's always out there reporting. I'll look at Stephen Graham, Take a Hike. Explore Rhode Island is out there. I'll look at the Land Trust website. Solom Woods, I learned a great deal by just looking at the website there. And then after all that research, I go out in the woods. I'm old school. I'll take a paper map and I got a pencil. And as I walk along, I make sure I stop and I look. What do I see? I write it down. Oh, that's what was on the website. Yeah, that makes sense. All right, what is that? I don't understand it. And I make detailed notes. When I come back, I dig in, do more research. One of the keys I found is that almost every town in Rhode Island has a very, very good detailed local history. They're usually buried at the local libraries, but if you go in there and ask, you will find them. And you'll read about all these great locations and who lived where in the farms. And the goal is if you can find the name of the historian who wrote the history and go out and visit, They know so much about who we were and how we lived. A very detailed portrait of what these farms were like. And then if you're lucky, you'll find some of these farm journals. That farm I showed you in South Kingstown, Browning Woods. The Browning family kept a detailed diary of building that whole parcel out. What type of wood they used, how they painted it, how many floors. There's on the edge of the property, there's 3 rocks. There's like one here, there's one here, there's one here. And I'm puzzling over that. What the heck could that be? The diary says that when people came to visit in a carriage, you could pull up to those 3 steps and walk down the 3 steps or walk back up. Very, very practical. But until you read the diary, couldn't quite figure out what was there. They'll tell you where the fruit trees were, you know, where the paths were, where the cows were, where the goats were. If you can find the diary, that's gold. That's wonderful.
Did you ever walk through the East Side Railroad Tunnel?
When I worked downtown at the Journal, I walked through that tunnel a number of times. Yeah, it's fun. It's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, but so that history's gone back and forth, right? It was open, they closed it, they opened it. It's a good part of the history. Right where Water Place Park is, there's another tunnel over there, right under Exchange Place, which is a nice tunnel through there too. But that was the engineering. Wonderful piece of construction, wonderful piece of infrastructure. Maybe one more question? Yes, sir. Wait, let Cindy get the mic over to you.
John, what do you see as the future of open space?
Yeah.
The remaining open space.
Okay, so okay, I could go on for like 20 minutes here, okay, but I won't. But here's the key, okay? It's an excellent question. So as I walk through the woods, okay, the question always occurred, and I'm mostly on the public preserves, right? I'm on the land trust properties, I'm on the state management areas, I'm on Nature Conservancy. What about between them, okay? What about this land in between? What is the highest, best use of that land for you and me, for our kids and our grandkids? What are we thinking about? I was in Charleston a while back, and there's a preserve called the Tucker Preserve, okay? Small, 22 acres, all right? Housing developer comes in, wants to buy the property, put up 25 houses, all right? The people of Charleston say, you know what? We think this is a valuable piece of property. We're gonna put an open bond issue on the ballot, raise some money, and buy that property. Well, that's interesting. When I walked there, you realize that just to the north is the huge Carter Preserve run by the Nature Conservancy. To the south is the Carolina Management Agency run by the state. Tucker connects the two. As you walk through that area, you'll see the stream go from Carter through Tucker right to Carolina. And you realize this is one watershed. This is one habitat. Why wouldn't we protect that? Is the highest best use of that land 25 houses or a preserved 20-acre part of land? I feel the same way about the solar industry, okay? Our sun works on alternate energy, all right? I am totally in agreement. If you want to lower the seas, get rid of the carbon, we need alternate energy. I live in Cranston. Did we need to cut down 12,000 trees in Western Cranston to build a solar farm? Is that the highest, best use of the land? My wife and I drove down to Westerly to do a presentation last week, and the leaves are off the trees. There's solar farms all the way along 95 on that beautiful pasture land. Is that the best use of the land or not? You know, you can go back to the 60s and 70s when we started this debate, okay? How do we save our land? It doesn't end. There's a lot of good land in around to build houses. I used to be the business editor. I get it. I understand economic development. But you have to build it on pristine land in a habitat? Do you have to build a solar farm by cutting down 12,000 trees? Can't we figure this out for a better idea? Just to finish off, so with the boys, we used to hike up in the Buck Hill campground area in the Northwest, right next to the George Washington Forest. So 6 months ago, a hiking buddy shows me a story that was in the paper that there's a company called Glamorous Camping. They want to buy the property and put up these wooden shelters so people in the city can come into the woods and live in the cabin, drive their cars in. So the people in Barrington and Gloucester, this is ridiculous. Why would you allow this to happen? And I said, well, here we go, all right? Beautiful piece of land, not going to happen. People in Barrington and Gloucester went to their zoning board, went to the legislature, says, no, we don't want that, okay? We don't want that to happen. And they stopped the process. So what happened? Pick up the paper a few weeks ago. The DEM buys that property for the scouts to be a nature preserve or preservation. So right next to George Washington, you will have this beautiful undisturbed land. Somebody asked me in a question where the places you would go where other people don't go to hike. George Washington and Buck Hill. It is wild up there, okay? Wonderful trails. You feel like you're 1,000 miles from Providence. And that purchase extends that. Hooray! Every once in a while we win one. And there has to be more thinking like that, I think. So when you ask about land use, it is issue, it continues to be an issue, and is going to continue to be an issue for the next generation. I just hope the next generation, you know, with all their interior and playing on video games, they understand the value of the woods. And they understand that somebody's going to pick up the torch here and fight the good fight the way you did and other people did in the land trust here. This is important for all of us. It goes on forever, right? That is an excellent question. Al, one more and then I think we're done. Yes.
Say your question.
Well, I agree with you entirely, Al. So my wife and I have had a chance to go around to the South Kingstown Land Trust, the Westerly Land Trust. We're going out someplace else next week. And you meet people who have volunteered their time, okay? They might be retired, they might be not, but what are they doing in the latter stages of their life? They've volunteered their time to maintain the trails. And I love the idea there's more people hiking than ever before. But you know what? They beat up the trails more than ever before. We need volunteers to preserve it and to lend their voices when the debate starts. What's the highest and best use of the land? You know, Rhode Island still has these places where stuff happened that you read about 2 years later. You know, Lynn will tell you and Tim, you know, sort of the job at the newspaper. Where can we shine the light of what's going on? There's less of that now. And so you really need to step up. This is important land. It needs to be preserved. The land trusts are a great place to start. They really are, Al. Good suggestion.
I could hear you talk about land trusts all day.
I bet.
So please thank John, and then he'll be around. We're still selling books, and he can chat with you. And if you bought a book and you didn't get it signed yet, I'm sure he'll do that for you. But we'll sort of filter out and gradually take our conversations out into the hallway. Thank you so much, John.
Thank you very much. I'll be out here in the hall. Thank you.